Snow had been falling since early morning, the kind that softened everything it touched and made the world feel quieter than usual. The house on Maplewood Drive stood wrapped in warm, yellow light, the windows glowing against the gray December sky. Inside, the smell of roasted turkey, cinnamon, and pine filled the air, mixing with the faint crackle of the fireplace. Emma Harper stood alone in the kitchen, staring at the counter where neatly wrapped gifts were lined up in careful rows. She checked the labels again, as if one might have changed its mind while she wasn't looking. Every year, she told herself it would feel different. Every year, she believed that the holidays would finally bring a sense of ease, of belonging. And yet, as Christmas Eve settled in, the familiar tightness returned to her chest. It wasn't that she disliked the season. In fact, she loved the idea of it, the generosity, the warmth, the promise that people could be better versions of themselves, even if only for a few days. What unsettled her was the pressure of making everything perfect, especially for a family that had learned to smile through unresolved silences. The doorbell rang, sharp and sudden, cutting through her thoughts. Emma flinched slightly before taking a steadying breath. "They're early," she murmured to herself, wiping her hands on a towel. She walked toward the front door, her footsteps muffled by the thick rug her mother had insisted on keeping even after her passing. As she reached for the handle, she caught her reflection in the hallway mirror. Dark hair pulled back loosely, eyes tired but determined. She forced a small smile before opening the door. Her brother Daniel stood there, snow clinging to his coat, his usual confident grin in place. Behind him was his wife, Claire, holding a casserole dish like a fragile offering. "Merry Christmas Eve," Daniel said, stepping inside without waiting for an invitation. His voice carried the easy warmth of someone who never questioned whether he belonged. "Hi," Emma replied, hugging them both. Claire's embrace lingered longer, as if she sensed the tension Emma worked so hard to hide. They moved into the living room, where the trees stood tall and decorated with ornaments collected over decades, some handmade, some chipped, all heavy with memory. Soon the house filled with familiar sounds, laughter drifting from the living room, the clink of glasses, the hum of old holiday music playing softly in the background. Emma moved between rooms, refilling drinks, adjusting decorations that didn't need adjusting, doing anything to avoid sitting still. The holidays had taught her that staying busy was the easiest way to avoid thinking too much. As evening approached, snow continued to fall outside, thickening into a quiet storm. Emma glanced at the clock and frowned. There was one place setting still empty, one gift left without a name. She had debated for days whether to prepare for this possibility, whether hope was worth the disappointment that so often followed it. And yet, she had set the table anyway, just in case. The doorbell rang again. This time, the sound felt heavier, as if it carried something more than a simple arrival. Conversation in the living room faltered, and Emma felt her pulse quicken. She walked to the door slowly, her hand hovering over the handle. For a brief moment, she considered pretending she hadn't heard it, but something deep inside urged her forward. When she opened the door, the cold rushed in, along with a man she barely recognized at first. He stood awkwardly on the porch, shoulders hunched against the wind, snow collecting in his dark hair. His coat was worn, his face thinner than she remembered, lines etched around his eyes that hadn't been there before. "Emma," he said softly, her name sounding almost unfamiliar on his lips. Her breath caught. "Michael?" It had been 7 years since she had last seen him, 7 years since he had walked out of her life without explanation, leaving behind more questions than answers. She had replayed that moment countless times, imagining what she would say if she ever saw him again. None of those rehearsed words came now. "I didn't know where else to go," Michael continued, shifting his weight nervously. "I was in town, and I hoped." Emma's mind raced. She could feel Daniel and Claire watching from behind her, the warmth of the house pressing against her back, the cold uncertainty of the night stretching out in front of her. This was one of those moments that seemed small on the surface, a choice to open a door or close it, but carried the weight of something much larger. Without fully understanding why, she stepped aside. "You should come in," she said quietly. Michael hesitated, then nodded, stepping across the threshold. The door closed behind them with a soft click, sealing them together inside the house and whatever unresolved past he had brought with him. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air thicker. Daniel's expression shifted from surprise to something harder to read. "What's he doing here?" he asked, his tone polite but edged. "I didn't plan this," Emma said quickly, though she wasn't sure who she was trying to convince. "He just showed up." Michael looked down, his hands clasped tightly in front of him. "I'm sorry for everything. I didn't come to cause trouble. I just didn't want to be alone tonight." Silence settled over the room, broken only by the distant crackle of the fire. Emma felt a familiar ache in her chest, a reminder of how much the past still held power over her. She thought of the empty place at the table, the unnamed gift waiting patiently under the tree. "Dinner's almost ready," Claire said gently, offering a lifeline. "Why don't we all sit down?" They moved toward the dining room in uneasy steps. Emma took her seat, her heart pounding as Michael sat across from her, close enough that she could see the exhaustion in his eyes. As plates were passed and food served, conversation remained cautious, skirting around the obvious tension like ice around a hidden crack. Emma watched Michael quietly, noticing the way he looked at the decorations, at the family photos lining the walls. There was longing there, and regret, and something else she couldn't quite place. She wondered what had happened to him in the years since he left, what had finally brought him back to her doorstep on Christmas Eve. As the meal went on, the initial stiffness began to ease just slightly. Laughter resurfaced, tentative at first, then more genuine. Morning arrived quietly, wrapped in a pale gray light that filtered through the snow-laden windows. The house felt different when Emma woke up, as though it had inhaled deeply during the night and was now holding its breath. She lay still for a moment, listening. No voices, no footsteps, only the faint hum of the heater and the distant caw of a crow outside. For a brief second, she wondered if the previous night had been a dream, a strange holiday imagination born from exhaustion and old memories. Then she remembered the look on Michael's face when he crossed the threshold, the way his eyes had lingered on her as if she might vanish if he blinked too long. She pulled the blanket tighter around herself and sat up slowly. The clock on her nightstand read just past 7. Christmas morning. A day that once meant excitement and early laughter now felt layered with uncertainty. She dressed quietly and made her way down the stairs, each step creaking softly beneath her feet. The smell of leftover turkey and cinnamon still lingered, mixing with the sharp freshness of pine from the tree. Michael was already awake. He sat at the small kitchen table, hands wrapped around a mug of coffee, staring out the window at the untouched snow. He looked up when he heard her enter, his expression guarded but hopeful. "Morning," he said, his voice low, as if he were afraid to disturb the house. "Morning," Emma replied, surprised by how steady her voice sounded. She moved to the counter, poured herself coffee, and leaned against it, unsure where to place herself in the room. They stood in silence for a moment, the kind that pressed in rather than drifting away. "I didn't mean to impose," Michael said, finally. "If you want me to leave, I understand." Emma met his gaze. "It's Christmas," she said, simply. "No one should be alone today." The words felt right, even if her heart hadn't fully caught up with them yet. Footsteps echoed from upstairs, followed by Daniel's voice calling out a groggy greeting. Soon the house stirred to life again. Claire emerged with her hair pulled back and a sleepy smile, and Daniel followed, stretching his arms as he glanced between Emma and Michael with thinly veiled discomfort. Breakfast was informal, a scattering of toast, fruit, and reheated pastries. Conversations stayed light, almost intentionally shallow. They spoke of the weather, of travel plans that had been canceled due to the storm, of movies playing on television later in the day. No one mentioned the past, though it hovered over the table like a silent guest. After breakfast, Emma suggested a walk. The snow had stopped falling, leaving the world outside pristine and hushed. Daniel declined, citing the cold, and Claire followed him back to the living room. Michael hesitated, then nodded. "I'd like that." They bundled up and stepped outside, the cold air biting at their cheeks. The street was nearly empty, muffled by thick snowbanks. Their boots crunched softly as they walked side by side, leaving a single set of parallel footprints behind them. "I didn't know if you'd open the door," Michael admitted, breaking the silence. "I practiced what I'd say, but none of it felt right." "Nothing ever does in those moments," Emma replied. She kept her eyes on the path ahead, afraid that if she looked at him too long, she'd see something she wasn't ready to face. They walked for a while before he spoke again. "I was scared, not of you, of myself. I thought leaving would make things clearer. Instead, it just made everything heavier." Emma stopped walking. She turned to face him, her breath visible in the cold air. "You disappeared. You didn't call, you didn't explain. You let me think I wasn't enough to make you stay." Michael's shoulders sagged. "I know, and I hate that I did that to you. I was drowning in my own failures, convinced I'd drag you down with me. It wasn't fair. It wasn't love. It was cowardice." The honesty in his voice disarmed her. She felt the familiar sting of tears, but blinked them back. "Why now? Why show up after all this time?" He looked back toward the house, its roof just visible above the trees. "Because I finally stopped running, and because this time of year, it reminds you of what you've lost." They resumed walking, slower now. Emma felt something shift inside her, not forgiveness exactly, but the beginning of understanding. She knew healing didn't happen all at once. It unfolded in small, deliberate choices. When they returned home, the living room was alive with soft music and the glow of the tree. Daniel and Claire sat on the floor, sorting gifts into piles. Claire looked up and smiled. "Perfect timing," she said. "We were just about to start." They gathered around the tree, the ritual both comforting and bittersweet. Emma handed out gifts, pausing when she reached the last one, the one she had wrapped without a name. She held it for a moment before offering it to Michael. "This was meant for whoever needed it," she said quietly. He accepted it with visible hesitation. Inside was a simple wool scarf, deep blue, soft and warm. Michael swallowed hard. "Thank you," he said. "You didn't have to." Emma shrugged. "Maybe I did." As the morning wore on, laughter came more easily. Stories were shared, some old, some new. Even Daniel relaxed, though his watchful glances toward Michael never fully disappeared. Emma noticed how Michael listened more than he spoke, how grateful he seemed just to be included. Later, as the afternoon light faded and the sky shifted toward dusk, Emma stood by the window again, watching the snow sparkle in the dying light. She knew the path ahead would be complicated. Trust would need to be rebuilt, boundaries redrawn. But as she looked around the room, at her family, imperfect but present, she felt a quiet sense of resolve. Christmas, she realized, wasn't about erasing the past. It was about choosing what to carry forward. And for the first time in years, she felt ready to choose differently. The afternoon drifted into evening with a softness that made time feel slower than usual. The sky outside deepened into shades of blue and silver, and the snow reflected the fading light like a mirror. Emma stood at the sink washing dishes, the warm water fogging up the window in front of her. She welcomed the task, letting the steady rhythm of it quiet her thoughts. Behind her, the living room murmured with low conversation and the occasional laugh, a fragile harmony she wasn't sure how long would last. She felt Michael's presence before she heard him. He hovered near the doorway, unsure of where to stand, as though he still hadn't earned the right to move freely through the house. "Can I help?" he asked. Emma nodded and handed him a towel. They worked side by side in silence, passing plates back and forth with careful politeness. The familiarity of the motion unsettled her more than if he had been a stranger. It reminded her of nights long ago when they had cooked together in tiny apartments, talking about dreams that now felt distant and half forgotten. "I should talk to Daniel," Michael said suddenly. "I know he's not comfortable with me here." Emma hesitated. "He's protective," she said. "He always has been." "That's not an excuse," Michael replied. "I hurt you. I hurt all of you, even if I didn't mean to." Later, when the kitchen was clean and the house settled into a quiet lull, Michael approached Daniel in the living room. Emma lingered nearby, pretending to straighten pillows while listening closely. Daniel sat rigidly on the couch, arms crossed, his jaw set. "I'm not asking for forgiveness," Michael began. "I just want you to know I'm sorry for leaving, for not being honest, for putting Emma in a position where she had to pick up the pieces alone." Daniel's eyes flicked toward Emma, then back to Michael. "You don't get to walk back in here like nothing happened. She spent years rebuilding herself. Do you have any idea how much damage you caused?" Michael nodded. "Every day," he said, quietly. The tension stretched, thick and uncomfortable. Finally, Daniel exhaled sharply. "I don't trust you, but for today, for her sake, I'll keep the peace." It wasn't forgiveness, but it was something. Emma felt her shoulders loosen, just a little. As night fell, Claire suggested a movie. They gathered blankets and settled into the living room, the lights dimmed except for the glow of the tree. The film played softly, but Emma found it hard to focus. Her thoughts kept drifting, circling questions she wasn't yet ready to ask. Halfway through, the power flickered, then went out completely. The house plunged into darkness, followed by a collective gasp. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling branches against the windows. "Well," said Claire, trying to sound cheerful, "that's festive." Daniel fetched flashlights from the hall closet, and Emma lit a few candles, their flames dancing against the walls. The sudden quiet, broken only by the wind, made the house feel isolated from the rest of the world. "It's probably the storm," said Daniel. "Could be out for a while." They gathered closer together, instinctively drawn toward the light. Michael sat across from Emma, his face half lit by candle glow, shadows softening his features. The intimacy of the moment felt unplanned, unavoidable. "My dad used to say moments like this were a gift, when everything stops and you're forced to just be," Michael said, unexpectedly. Emma studied him. "Did you believe him?" "I do now. Back then, I was always looking ahead. I didn't know how to stay." The power outage seemed to loosen something in the room. Stories began to surface, unprompted and honest. Claire talked about her childhood Christmases, loud and chaotic. Daniel shared memories of their parents, moments Emma hadn't thought about in years. Laughter mixed with tears, and the hours passed unnoticed. Eventually, the conversation drifted into deeper waters. Michael spoke of the years he'd been gone, jobs that didn't last, cities that never felt like home, nights spent wondering what would have happened if he'd chosen differently. He didn't paint himself as a hero, nor did he ask for sympathy. He simply told the truth. Emma listened, her heart aching in ways she hadn't expected. She realized she had carried her anger like armor, protecting herself from the vulnerability that came with caring. Hearing him speak didn't erase the past, but it humanized it. When the power finally returned, the lights flickered back on, almost jarring in their brightness. No one moved right away. It felt as though the magic of the darkness lingered, fragile and fleeting. Later that night, as everyone prepared for bed, Emma stood at the foot of the stairs, watching Michael hesitate near the guest room. "Thank you." The night passed lightly, as if the house itself had decided to rest after carrying so much emotion. When Emma woke, pale winter light slipped through the curtains, and for a moment she lay still, listening to the familiar sounds of morning, the soft hum of the heater, the distant rush of a car passing on the main road. There was no rush today, no schedule pressing down on her. And yet, beneath the calm, she felt the steady pull of what still remained unspoken. Downstairs, the kitchen was already warm with the scent of coffee. Claire stood at the counter, flipping pancakes with practiced ease. Daniel sat at the table, scrolling through his phone, his posture relaxed in a way Emma hadn't seen in days. Michael was there too, seated slightly apart, reading the back of a cereal box, as if it held something profound. "Good morning," Emma said. They echoed the greeting, and she joined them, taking a mug Claire handed her. Breakfast unfolded easily, conversation flowing in small, comfortable loops. It struck Emma how ordinary it all felt, how quickly the house had adjusted to Michael's presence, as though it were testing the possibility of normalcy. After breakfast, Daniel announced he and Claire were going out to pick up a few things before the roads worsened again. Claire grabbed her coat and smiled at Emma. "We won't be long," she said, her tone carrying a subtle meaning Emma couldn't ignore. The door closed behind them, and silence settled in their wake. Emma stood at the sink, staring at the suds swirling around her hands. She knew this moment was coming. There were no distractions left now, no buffer of other voices. Michael cleared his throat. "I should probably go soon," he said. "I don't want to overstay." Emma turned to face him. "Sit," she said, gesturing toward the table. Her voice was calm but firm. He obeyed, folding his hands together, waiting. Emma dried her hands slowly and sat across from him. For a long moment, neither spoke. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second marking the space between who they were and who they used to be. "You never told me why you left, not really." Michael nodded, as if he'd been bracing himself for the question. "I was ashamed," he began. "I lost my job, I was in debt, I felt like I'd failed at everything I promised you I'd be." Emma felt a familiar ache stir. "You could have told me." "I know," he said, "but I convinced myself you'd be better off without me, that if I disappeared, you'd move on faster." "And you thought that was kinder?" she asked. "No," he said softly. "I thought it was easier." The honesty landed between them, heavy but clean. Emma leaned back, absorbing his words. She realized how many years she had spent filling the gaps with her own assumptions, many of them far harsher than the truth. "I built a life after you left, not the one I imagined, but one that kept me standing. I learned how to be alone." Michael met her eyes. "I see that now," he said, "and I'm not here to undo it. I just needed you to know that leaving was the worst decision I ever made." Emma closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. "You don't get to come back and ask for what we had. That version of us doesn't exist anymore." "I know," he replied. "I'm not asking for that. I'm asking for honesty, and maybe, someday, forgiveness." Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the windows. Emma thought of all the moments she had replayed in her mind, the questions she had asked into empty rooms. She had imagined anger would feel like closure. Instead, it was this quiet clarity that finally loosened its grip. When Daniel and Claire returned, arms full of groceries, they sensed the shift immediately. The house felt calmer, grounded. No words were exchanged, but something had settled into place. The afternoon was spent preparing dinner together. Hands moved in sync, chopping, stirring, tasting. Emma noticed how Michael stayed attentive, careful not to overstep, always ready to step back if needed. It wasn't lost on her. As evening approached, snow began to fall again, light and steady. They sat down to eat, the table filled with warmth and shared effort. Daniel raised his glass in a small toast. "To family," he said simply. Emma caught Michael's eye across the table. There was gratitude there, and restraint, and a quiet promise to take things one step at a time. The next morning arrived with a quiet resolve that Emma felt even before she opened her eyes. The house no longer felt suspended between past and present. It felt lived in again. She dressed slowly, taking her time, as if giving the day permission to unfold at its own pace. When she stepped downstairs, she found Michael standing near the front window, his coat already on, staring out at the street as though he were weighing a decision. "I was thinking of going into town," he said when he noticed her. "Just for a bit, clear my head." Emma nodded. That might be good. He hesitated, then added, "You're welcome to come, or not. I understand either way." The offer surprised her. It wasn't the invitation itself, but the lack of expectation behind it. After a moment, she grabbed her coat. "I'll come," she said. The drive was quiet, the roads still edged with snow. The town looked smaller than Emma remembered, softened by winter. Storefronts were decorated with lights and wreaths, though many were closed for the holiday. They parked near the square and walked, their breath clouding the cold air. They stopped at a small cafe that Emma hadn't visited in years. Inside, the warmth and smell of coffee wrapped around them instantly. They sat by the window, mugs steaming between their hands. "I come here sometimes when I'm in town," Michael said. "It helps me remember who I was before everything fell apart." Emma studied him. And who was that? He smiled faintly. "Someone who thought love could fix anything." "And now?" she asked. "Now I think love has to be honest," he said, "or it breaks under its own weight." The words stayed with her as they left the cafe and continued walking. They passed the old bookstore where Emma used to lose hours, the park where Daniel and Emma had played as children. Each place stirred memories, but instead of pain, there was a gentle nostalgia, as if time had softened the edges. They reached the edge of the park and sat on a bench dusted with snow. Children's laughter echoed faintly from a distance, a reminder that life continued in simple, beautiful ways. "I don't know what this means for us. I don't even know what I want yet." Michael nodded. "I'm not here to rush anything. I just want to be present, for once." The sincerity in his voice made something ease in her chest. She realized how much she had feared being pulled back into old patterns, but this felt different, slower, grounded. When they returned to the house, Daniel was in the garage sorting through boxes. He looked up as they approached. "Everything okay?" he asked. "Yes," Emma said, surprised by how true it felt. That evening, as they prepared dinner, Daniel and Michael worked side by side, their movements awkward but cooperative. Emma watched from the doorway, aware of how these small moments carried more weight than grand gestures. After dinner, they gathered around the fireplace. The fire cast long shadows, and the room felt intimate and safe. Claire suggested sharing one thing they were grateful for, a simple tradition she had grown up with. Daniel spoke first, grateful for time together. Claire followed, grateful for warmth and second chances. When it was Michael's turn, he hesitated, then said, "I'm grateful for being allowed back into this space, even temporarily." Emma swallowed. When her turn came, she took a breath. "I'm grateful for learning that I can choose what I carry forward." Later that night, Emma lay in bed, staring at the ceiling. She thought about the way the day had unfolded, about how healing didn't announce itself with certainty. It arrived quietly, in moments of choice and restraint. She knew there would be hard days ahead, conversations that would test the fragile understanding they were building. But for the first time in a long while, she didn't feel afraid of that work. As sleep finally claimed her, Emma felt a steady confidence settle in. Whatever came next wouldn't be defined by abandonment or fear. It would be shaped by the courage to stay, to listen, and to move forward with intention. The house felt quieter the next day, not with absence, but with reflection. Morning light stretched across the living room floor, catching dust motes that drifted lazily in the air. Emma sat on the couch with a blanket around her shoulders, a mug of tea cooling in her hands. She wasn't waiting for anything in particular, yet she felt alert, as if something subtle was about to reveal itself. Michael was in the spare room, packing his bag slowly. Each fold of clothing felt symbolic, as though he were trying not to disturb the fragile balance that had formed. He paused often, staring at the wall, replaying conversations in his mind. He had come here hoping for forgiveness, but what he had found instead was something heavier and more valuable: accountability. When he stepped back into the hallway, Emma looked up. Their eyes met, and in that silent exchange, they both understood that a decision hovered between them. "I should head out today," Michael said. I don't want this to feel like I'm settling back in without earning it. Emma nodded, appreciating the thoughtfulness. Where will you go? A friend offered a place for a few days. After that, I'm not sure, but I'll figure it out. They sat together at the kitchen table while the coffee brewed, the familiar sound grounding them. Outside, the snow had begun to melt, water dripping steadily from the roof, marking the slow shift from stillness to movement. Do you remember the letter you wrote me? Michael asked suddenly. Emma froze. What letter? The one you never sent, he said gently. You left it in the drawer the last night we talked. I found it after you went to bed. Her breath caught. She had forgotten about that letter, the raw words she had poured onto paper when she thought honesty might save them. You read it? I did, and I carried it with me for years. It was the one thing that reminded me I had been truly loved. Emma felt tears rise, unbidden. Why didn't you say anything? Because I wasn't ready to be the man that letter deserved, he replied. The truth of that settled between them, bittersweet and validating. Emma realized how long she had questioned her own worth, unaware that her love had mattered more than she knew. Daniel and Claire joined them later, the moods subdued but calm. There was no dramatic goodbye. Instead, there were quiet acknowledgments, small gestures of respect. Daniel shook Michael's hand firmly, his expression serious but no longer hostile. Take care of yourself, Daniel said. I will. Thank you for letting me be here. When Michael stepped outside, his bag slung over his shoulder, Emma followed him to the door. The air was crisp, carrying the scent of melting snow and pine. This isn't goodbye, he said. No, Emma agreed. It's just a pause. He smiled, a mixture of relief and resolve. I'll call, if that's okay. It is, she said. She watched as he walked down the path, his figure growing smaller until he disappeared around the corner. The door closed softly behind her, and she leaned against it, feeling both the weight and the lightness of the moment. The rest of the day passed gently. Emma and Claire baked cookies, laughing over uneven shapes and burnt edges. Daniel worked on a puzzle at the table, the pieces slowly coming together. Life resumed its quiet rhythm, altered but intact. That evening, as Emma sat alone by the window, she reflected on how much had changed in such a short time. She had opened her door to the past and survived. More than that, she had reclaimed her voice. She didn't know what the future held for her and Michael, or if their paths would truly align again. The days after Michael left unfolded with a strange mix of familiarity and quiet adjustment. The house returned to its usual rhythm, but Emma felt the difference in small, persistent ways. A mug left drying by the sink reminded her of conversations cut short. The guest room door, now closed, held the echo of presence rather than absence. She moved through her routines with intention, aware that something inside her had shifted, even if the world around her looked the same. Daniel and Claire stayed a few more days before heading back home. On their last morning, they lingered over breakfast longer than usual. There were fewer words, but more meaning behind them. When they finally left, hugging Emma tightly at the door, she felt both gratitude and a subtle loneliness settle in. Once the house was empty again, Emma decided to clean. Not out of obligation, but as a way to ground herself. She sorted through drawers, wiped shelves, and eventually found herself standing in front of an old storage box tucked away in the hall closet. She hesitated before opening it, already sensing what it held. Inside were pieces of a life she had carefully packed away. Photographs, ticket stubs, handwritten notes, memories she had told herself no longer mattered. She sat on the floor and sifted through them slowly, allowing herself to feel without judgment. At the bottom of the box was a small notebook. Her handwriting filled the pages, raw and unfiltered. She read the words she had once been too afraid to send, and instead of pain, she felt compassion for the woman she had been. Hopeful, honest, brave in her own way. Later that afternoon, her phone buzzed. A message from an unfamiliar number appeared on the screen. "It's me. Just wanted to let you know I made it safely." Emma stared at the message for a long moment before replying. "I'm glad. Take care." She set the phone down, her heart steady. The exchange felt right, open but unburdened. That evening, Emma walked through the neighborhood, the air colder now, the streets busy with people returning to their routines. She noticed small things she had overlooked before: the way light spilled from windows, the sound of laughter drifting from a nearby house, the quiet comfort of being one among many. As she passed the park, she paused, watching a group of children playing in the snow, their joy unfiltered and contagious. She smiled, realizing how long it had been since she'd allowed herself to be present in moments like this. When she returned home, she lit a candle and sat at the table, the notebook open in front of her. This time, she didn't write to Michael. She wrote to herself about what she wanted, what she feared, what she deserved. The words flowed easily, no longer tangled in expectation. As night settled in, Emma closed the notebook and felt a quiet certainty take root. She hadn't lost something when Michael left again. She had gained clarity. The past no longer felt like an anchor pulling her backward. It felt like a chapter she had finally read to the end. And as she turned off the light and prepared for sleep, Emma understood that connection didn't. Winter began to loosen its grip in subtle ways. The snow retreated from sidewalks, revealing patches of wet concrete and dull grass beneath. Days grew a few minutes longer, and the light carried a faint promise of change. Emma noticed these shifts with a quiet attentiveness, as if the world were mirroring something unfolding inside her. She returned to work after the holidays with a sense of steadiness she hadn't felt in years. Conversations with colleagues flowed more easily. Decisions that once felt heavy now seemed manageable. It wasn't happiness exactly, but it was clarity, and that felt just as valuable. One afternoon, while sorting through emails, she came across an old message draft she had never sent. It was addressed to a community center downtown, asking about volunteer opportunities during the holidays. She had written it months earlier, then closed the window, telling herself she was too busy. On impulse, she opened a new message and sent it. The response came the next day. Emma found herself standing in the community center's kitchen later that week, tying an apron around her waist. The room buzzed with activity, voices overlapping, dishes clattering, laughter rising unexpectedly. She felt slightly out of place at first, but the warmth of the space eased her nerves. She was assigned to work alongside an older woman named Ruth, who moved with calm efficiency. As they chopped vegetables together, Ruth asked simple questions about Emma's life, listening carefully to the answers. "People think giving is about what you offer," Ruth said at one point, "but most of the time it's about what you're willing to receive." The words stayed with Emma long after the shift ended. Over the following weeks, volunteering became part of her routine. She learned names, stories, patterns. She listened more than she spoke. Each interaction felt like a reminder that connection didn't require perfection, only presence. One evening, after a long day at the center, Emma checked her phone to find a missed call from Michael. There was no voicemail. She sat with the phone in her hand, considering. When she finally returned the call, it went to voicemail. She left a brief message, neutral and kind, then set the phone aside. They spoke a few days later, their conversation easy but measured. Michael talked about finding steady work, about staying in one place longer than usual. Emma listened, offering encouragement without slipping into old habits. When they hung up, she felt no urgency, no longing, only a quiet respect for the distance they were both learning to honor. As spring approached, Emma began spending more time outside. She walked in the evenings, noticing buds forming on bare branches, the earth softening beneath her feet. She felt connected to these small signs of renewal, as though they validated the slow progress she was making. One night, as she prepared for bed, Emma paused in front of the mirror. She saw someone familiar, yet changed, not hardened, not closed, but grounded. She smiled, not out of satisfaction, but recognition. She understood now that the choices that shaped her life didn't always announce themselves as monumental. Sometimes they arrived quietly, disguised as everyday decisions, to show up, to listen, to open a door not for someone else, but for herself. And in that understanding, Emma felt a sense of belonging that didn't depend on anyone else's return. The days grew steadily brighter as winter loosened its grip, and Emma felt a subtle shift in her own rhythm. The early morning light poured into her kitchen in soft streams, highlighting the warmth of the room and the organized chaos of her life. She brewed coffee and lingered by the window, watching the neighborhood slowly awaken, cars crunching over the remaining patches of snow, neighbors hurrying about their routines. It felt ordinary, and that ordinariness was a kind of gift. Her life had settled into a gentle cadence. Work no longer weighed her down, and volunteering at the community center had become a grounding ritual. She had learned the quiet power of small acts, chopping vegetables for a meal, listening to someone's story, offering a smile that didn't demand anything in return. These gestures reminded her that connection was built not from grand declarations, but from the persistence of being present. That afternoon, a knock at the door startled her. She wasn't expecting anyone. Standing on the porch, brushing snow off her coat, was an elderly man she didn't recognize. His eyes were kind, framed by deep lines, and he held a small box wrapped in brown paper. "Hello," he said softly. "I'm looking for Emma Harper. I was told you might help me." Emma hesitated, then nodded. "Come in. What can I do for you?" Inside, the man set the box on the counter. He explained, "I run a local foundation. We work with families who are struggling, especially during the holidays. I heard you've been volunteering at the community center, and I wondered if you might want to join us for a special project." Emma listened as he described the initiative, a program to deliver warm meals and care packages to families who couldn't afford a festive celebration. It was ambitious, and it required both planning and heart. As he spoke, Emma felt a familiar spark she hadn't realized she had missed, the feeling of being needed for something larger than herself. "I'd like to help," she said before thinking too much. The words felt right, instinctive, almost urgent. Over the next few days, Emma worked alongside the foundation's volunteers. She learned names quickly, remembered stories, and coordinated efforts to gather food, gifts, and clothing. Michael's voice surfaced in her mind, but instead of longing or regret, she felt steady, determined. She was building something here, something tangible and lasting. One evening, as Emma returned home from a long day, she paused at the foot of her stairs, reflecting on how far she had come. The house was quiet, and the silence felt earned. She thought of Michael, of the past, and of the small, courageous choices she had made, choices to forgive, to open herself, to remain present. As she sat at the window, watching the last light fade from the sky, she realized that connection was not a single moment of reconciliation or reunion. It was the accumulation of all the little decisions to show up, to be honest, and to carry love forward without expectation. And in that quiet realization, Emma felt a profound sense of possibility. The world beyond her window stretched vast and uncharted, and for the first time in a long time, she felt ready to meet it fully, without fear, without hesitation, and with the courage to embrace whatever or whoever might come next. The first hints of spring began to creep through the town, subtle but unmistakable. Patches of green pushed through the edges of the melting snow, and the air smelled faintly of wet earth and new beginnings. Emma found herself drawn outdoors more often, walking along familiar streets with a sense of attentiveness she hadn't felt in years. Every sound, the laughter of children, the chatter of neighbors, the occasional bark of a dog, seemed to anchor her more firmly to the present. Her volunteering had grown into something steady. The foundation's work demanded planning, patience, and empathy, and Emma found a quiet satisfaction in the rhythm of it. She had learned to ask the right questions, to listen without judgment, and to celebrate the small victories alongside those she was helping. In the process, she discovered that giving wasn't just about what she could do for others, it was about what she allowed herself to feel and receive in return. One afternoon, as Emma sorted supplies in the foundation's storage room, a familiar voice called her name. She turned, surprised, to see Michael standing in the doorway. He looked hesitant, carrying a backpack slung over one shoulder. His presence didn't startle her this time. It felt expected, in a quiet way, like a piece of the world she had subconsciously left space for. "Hi," he said softly. "Hey," she replied, setting down a box. "What brings you here?" "I wanted to see what you've been up to, and maybe help, if that's okay." Emma studied him, noting the way he seemed measured, respectful, aware of boundaries. "It's okay," she said finally. "We can use an extra pair of hands." They worked side by side, chopping vegetables, packing care kits, and organizing gift bags. The hours passed quickly, filled with conversation that was easy yet cautious, full of shared laughter and unspoken acknowledgments. Michael didn't overstep, didn't try to reclaim any past intimacy. Instead, he simply contributed, quietly, earnestly, as though he had learned the value of patience. During a brief pause, Emma handed him a bottle of water. "You're good at this," she said. "I'm trying, and I've had a good teacher." She smiled faintly. It was strange, comforting to be reminded of what had been lost and what could still be built anew. Later, as the volunteers gathered for a quick break, Michael asked, "Do you ever think about us?" His tone was tentative, careful. Emma leaned back, considering. "Sometimes," she admitted, "but I've learned that thinking about it isn't the same as needing it. The past shapes us, but it doesn't have to define what we do now." He nodded, seeming to absorb her words. "I think I'm starting to understand that." The afternoon faded into evening, and they returned home together, the sun setting in gentle shades of orange and pink. The air felt warmer, lighter, as if the world itself were opening up after months of restraint. As Emma closed the door behind her, she felt the quiet satisfaction of a day well lived. Connection, she realized, wasn't always about reconciliation or closure. Sometimes it was simply about showing up, staying present, and letting time and effort build trust in ways words could not. That night, as she prepared for bed, she paused to look out the window. The street was bathed in twilight, and the buds on the trees caught the last rays of sun, delicate and promising. Emma felt a gentle confidence settle in her chest. Life had a way of moving forward, sometimes slowly, sometimes unpredictably, but she understood now that the courage to engage with it fully, to participate rather than retreat, was the only way to truly be ready for whatever might come next. And for the first time in a long while, Emma felt that readiness in every fiber of her being. The following week arrived with the kind of brisk clarity that only early spring could bring. The mornings were cold enough to remind Emma that winter hadn't fully released its grip, yet the afternoons carried the faint warmth of the sun pressing through clouds. She walked to the community center with a purposeful stride, the rhythm of her boots on the wet pavement matching the steadiness she had begun to feel in her own life. Inside, the center buzzed with energy. Volunteers moved between tables, sorting donations and preparing for another round of deliveries. Emma immediately felt at home among the chaos, slipping into tasks with a quiet competence. She sorted clothing and packed boxes while keeping an eye on the volunteers, guiding where necessary, listening when others spoke, offering encouragement without overstepping. Michael arrived shortly afterward, carrying a clipboard and a determined expression. "I've been assigned to coordinate the deliveries today," he said. "I hope you don't mind." Emma shook her head. "I don't. Let's get to it." The two of them moved efficiently, checking addresses, organizing packages, and mapping out routes. As they worked, conversation flowed naturally, unforced, with an easy rhythm they hadn't found in years. Michael spoke of lessons learned in his time away, how patience, humility, and accountability had reshaped his understanding of relationships. Emma shared insights from her own experiences, how volunteering had taught her that even small actions could ripple outward in unexpected ways. By midday, they loaded the delivery van with packages. The streets were slick with melting snow, and the wind carried the faint smell of wet asphalt and budding trees. Their first stop was a modest home at the edge of town, where a single mother and her young son greeted them with wide, grateful smiles. Emma handed over a box filled with food and warm clothing, while Michael knelt to adjust the boy's coat. "Thank you," the mother said, her eyes misting. "I didn't think we'd have much this season." Emma smiled. "You deserve it. We're happy to help." The deliveries continued, each stop carrying its own quiet moments of connection. They offered more than packages. They offered attention, presence, and a sense that someone cared. At one point, Emma noticed Michael watching her interact with the families, a small smile tugging at the corner of his mouth. It struck her as significant, not pride, not ownership, but respect. By the time they returned to the center, the van was empty and the day's work had left them tired but fulfilled. Emma felt a deep satisfaction, a sense that she was participating in something meaningful beyond herself. Michael leaned against the vehicle, wiping his brow. "You did well today," he said. "You did too. We did well, together." For the first time, the phrase didn't feel heavy or loaded. It was simply true. That evening, Emma sat by her window, watching the sky deepen into shades of violet and indigo. The neighborhood was quieter now, the echoes of the day's activity fading into a gentle hush. She reflected on the week, on Michael's presence, on the work at the center, on the subtle ways her life had shifted. She realized that connection was not a single grand gesture or a moment of reconciliation. It was the accumulation of choices made consistently, day after day, in honesty and care. It was opening a door, offering help, listening, forgiving, and moving forward without expectation. Emma felt a profound calm settle over her. The world outside her window was vast and full of possibilities, and for the first time in a long while, she felt equipped to meet it fully, ready to embrace whatever challenges and joys lay ahead. And in that stillness, she understood that the most transformative connections were not always about the people who returned, but about the courage to remain open, present, and unwaveringly human. Spring deepened over the town, carrying with it a gentle sense of renewal. The days were longer, the air warmer, and the lingering chill of winter had finally begun to soften. Emma found herself moving through her routines with a steadiness she hadn't known for years. The mornings were quiet and deliberate, filled with coffee and reflection, and the afternoons carried her to the community center, where the rhythm of work and the hum of human connection kept her grounded. One Thursday, as she sorted supplies for the weekly deliveries, Michael arrived earlier than usual. He carried a small notebook, dog-eared and worn, and a determined energy that Emma hadn't seen since his return. "I thought we could plan a new initiative," he said, laying the notebook on the table. "Something that goes beyond the usual deliveries. Maybe workshops, classes, a way to empower families long-term, not just give them food." Emma studied him. His tone was earnest, but not overbearing. There was a quiet humility in the way he approached the idea, a desire to contribute without taking over. "I think that's a great idea," she said finally. "We can work on it together." They spent the morning brainstorming, writing ideas, mapping out schedules, and considering needs. Their conversation flowed seamlessly, alternating between practical planning and moments of laughter. Emma realized that working alongside Michael no longer carried the weight of past grievances. Instead, it felt collaborative, constructive, and honest. After lunch, they prepared a small workshop on basic budgeting and cooking for families. The session was modest but meaningful, with parents and children alike engaged in learning and sharing. Emma watched as Michael patiently explained measurements and techniques, his presence calm and encouraging. She felt a quiet pride, not in him, but in the way they were creating something that mattered. During a break, Emma stepped outside to the courtyard. The sun was higher now, reflecting off puddles of melted snow, and the budding trees swayed gently in the breeze. She inhaled deeply, feeling the warmth on her face. For a long moment, she allowed herself to simply exist in the present, without worry, without expectation. When she returned inside, she found Michael waiting with a cup of tea. He handed it to her silently, a gesture so small yet profoundly thoughtful. She accepted it, their fingers brushing lightly. The moment was fleeting, ordinary, yet it carried a quiet significance, a recognition of the present, an acknowledgement of shared effort, and a respect for the space they now occupied together. As the workshop ended and families returned to their homes, Emma lingered, helping with cleanup and reflection. Michael joined her, and together they packed away materials, laughing quietly over small mishaps and miscalculations. The ease between them felt new, yet comfortable, like a rhythm they were discovering together. That evening, back at home, Emma sat by her window once more. The sky was painted in shades of rose and gold, the fading sunlight glinting off the rooftops. She thought of the week, the work, the moments of connection, the quiet lessons learned. She understood now that transformation didn't arrive suddenly. It came in moments of choice, in the consistent presence of honesty, and in the willingness to engage with life fully, without retreat. Emma felt a deep, steady calm settle over her. She didn't know what the future held, whether Michael would remain a part of it, or if the work at the center would continue to shape her life in ways she couldn't foresee. But she knew this: she had discovered a resilience within herself, a courage to remain open and present, and a capacity for connection that wasn't dependent on reunion, forgiveness, or certainty. And as night fell, she allowed herself to imagine the possibilities, feeling ready. Spring had fully settled in, carrying with it a vibrancy that seemed to color everything around Emma. The trees were clothed in fresh green, the air smelled faintly of blossoms, and the streets echoed with the chatter of children playing outside. Emma noticed the subtle changes in her own life, too. The way her mornings felt lighter, how she moved through her days with intention, and the quiet satisfaction that came from meaningful work at the community center. One morning, as she walked along the sidewalk toward the center, she spotted a small group gathered near the park across the street. Curious, she approached and discovered a local art initiative, inviting community members to contribute paintings and crafts to brighten shared spaces. Inspired, Emma decided to join in, seeing it as an extension of her work at the center, another way to foster connection and participation. Michael arrived shortly after, carrying a small canvas and an assortment of paints. "I thought I'd try my hand at this too," he said, his usual earnestness softened by a hint of uncertainty. Emma smiled. "I didn't know you painted." "I didn't," he admitted, "but I figured it was time to try new things." They set up side by side, dipping brushes into bright colors and adding strokes to their canvases. The conversation was light, playful, filled with laughter and teasing. Emma realized how much she had missed the simplicity of just being present with someone, without the weight of expectation or the shadows of the past looming overhead. As they painted, people began to notice their efforts, offering encouragement, sharing their own work, and occasionally asking for advice. Emma felt a warm sense of community enveloping them, a reminder that connection often grew in unexpected places. By the afternoon, their canvases were complete, vivid, imperfect, and alive with personality. They hung the art together at the park's community wall, stepping back to admire the burst of color against the soft backdrop of spring foliage. Walking back toward the community center, Emma and Michael fell into a comfortable silence. She thought about the many small steps she had taken since Michael's return, moments of honesty, volunteering, listening, sharing. Each action, seemingly minor at the time, had contributed to a gradual transformation in her life. At the center, they helped with another round of meal deliveries, coordinating volunteers and ensuring that every family felt seen and cared for. Emma noticed how Michael had grown into his role, confident yet humble, contributing without seeking attention or approval. That evening, after the last of the meals had been delivered and the center was quiet, Emma and Michael walked home together. The streets were bathed in the soft glow of streetlights, the scent of blooming flowers mingling with the crisp night air. "Do you ever think about the future?" Emma asked, breaking the silence. She considered the question carefully. "I do, but I think I've learned that it's not about predicting it, it's about preparing yourself to live fully in whatever comes." He nodded, thoughtfully. "I think I'm starting to understand that too." As Emma reached her doorstep, she paused, feeling the weight of the day settle into something warm and steady. She knew the path ahead was still uncertain, filled with challenges, surprises, and choices she couldn't foresee. Yet for the first time in a long while, she felt ready to meet it, not with fear, not with hesitation, but with the courage to engage fully, to remain present, and to embrace connection in all its forms. And as she stepped inside, closing the door behind her, Emma carried with her a quiet certainty that life, when lived honestly and with intention, held more beauty and possibility than she had ever allowed herself to imagine. Spring had settled into a steady rhythm, and with it came a sense of calm determination in Emma's life. The early mornings were soft with light, the air fragrant with the scent of new growth, and the streets of her neighborhood hummed with activity. She moved through her days with purpose, aware of the small choices that had begun to shape a life she could finally call her own. That Saturday, the community center organized a local fair to celebrate the families they had supported over the past months. Emma arrived early, carrying boxes of supplies, her mind already racing with details of setup and coordination. Volunteers bustled around, decorating tables, arranging snacks, and ensuring that every detail contributed to a sense of warmth and inclusion. Michael appeared shortly after, a coffee in each hand and a clipboard tucked under his arm. "I thought we could go over the schedule together," he said. His tone was calm, organized, yet carrying an undercurrent of excitement. Emma smiled, grateful for the steady partnership they had forged. "Let's do it." Together, they oversaw the setup, guiding volunteers and welcoming families as they arrived. Emma felt a deep sense of fulfillment watching children laugh, parents relax, and strangers connect over games and shared experiences. It struck her that these small, ordinary moments, the handing out of cookies, the cheerful chatter, the collaborative effort, were in fact extraordinary in the ways that truly mattered. During a quieter moment, Michael approached her, holding a small piece of paper. "A family I met last week wanted to thank you," he said, handing it to her. Emma read the words, simple expressions of gratitude, heartfelt and earnest. She felt warmth spread through her chest, not pride, but recognition that her efforts and those of everyone around her had created ripples of positive impact. The afternoon passed in a blur of activity. Emma helped a shy child navigate the craft table, offered advice to parents cooking in the demo kitchen, and checked in with volunteers, ensuring everyone felt supported. Michael remained a steady presence at her side, quietly observing, stepping in where needed, offering guidance without imposing. As the sun began to lower, casting golden light across the fair. Emma and Michael stood at the edge of the crowd. The laughter of children, the soft chatter of adults, and the music floating from the small stage painted the world in a warm glow. "I never imagined something like this," Emma said quietly. Michael looked at her, thoughtful. "Neither did I, but it's amazing what can happen when you show up consistently, with intention." Emma nodded. She realized that the past, the heartbreak, the fear, the mistakes, had all led to this moment, not as a culmination, but as a continuation of effort, honesty, and presence. As the fair wound down, families waved goodbye, volunteers packed away supplies, and the evening shadows stretched across the center's courtyard. Emma stood near the door, watching the last of the visitors leave. She felt a profound sense of contentment, a quiet pride rooted not in herself alone, but in the community she had helped nurture and the connections she had learned to cherish. That night, as she prepared for bed, she paused by the window. The stars were beginning to appear, delicate and distant, yet brilliant. Emma reflected on the journey of the past months, the choices she had made, the courage to remain present, the relationships she had allowed to grow in honesty and respect. For the first time in a long while, she felt complete. Not in the sense that everything was perfect, but in the way that life felt open, meaningful, and full of possibility. And as sleep claimed her, Emma understood that the greatest gift wasn't the resolution of the past or the certainty of the future. It was the ability to engage fully with the present. Spring had fully arrived, the kind of day that felt like the world itself was holding its breath, poised between warmth and possibility. Emma awoke to sunlight spilling across her bedroom floor, painting the room in golden hues. For the first time in weeks, she didn't feel the weight of uncertainty pressing on her chest. Instead, there was a quiet energy, a sense that life was ready for her to step into it fully. She brewed her morning coffee and lingered by the window, watching the neighborhood stir to life. Children chased each other down the sidewalks, dogs barked happily, and neighbors exchanged greetings across fences. Emma smiled, recognizing the beauty in these small, ordinary moments, moments she had once overlooked in her preoccupation with past mistakes and future fears. Her phone buzzed lightly. A message from Michael appeared. "Coffee later? Just to catch up?" She paused for a moment, then typed back simply, "I'd like that." It was neither hesitant nor eager, it was measured, thoughtful, and intentional. At the cafe, sunlight streamed through tall windows, and the aroma of fresh pastries filled the air. Michael arrived moments later, carrying his usual quiet attentiveness. They greeted each other with ease, a comfort born of honesty and shared experience. As they sat, Emma reflected on the months that had passed. The holidays had brought unexpected challenges, reconciliations, and revelations. Michael's return had forced her to confront her own boundaries, her capacity for forgiveness, and her willingness to remain present without expectation. And through it all, she had discovered resilience, clarity, and a deeper understanding of what connection truly meant. They spoke of small things, the projects at the community center, local news, and shared memories, but the conversation occasionally veered into subtler territory, hopes, reflections, and what they had learned about themselves. Neither sought to recapture the past, and neither pressed for a definitive future. Instead, they allowed the moment to exist, unforced and real. Later that evening, Emma walked home through the quiet streets, the sun lowering toward the horizon, casting long shadows across the sidewalks. The world felt alive with possibility. She thought about the families she had helped, the connections she had nurtured, and the small choices she had made that had accumulated into meaningful change. As she approached her front door, Emma paused and looked back at the neighborhood. The memory of pain, fear, and uncertainty still lingered, but it no longer dictated her steps. She felt gratitude for the past, not as a burden, but as a teacher. She understood now that life's richness came from showing up, embracing honesty, and being willing to engage fully, even when outcomes were uncertain. Inside, the house was quiet and welcoming. Emma prepared for bed, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She realized that the greatest gift of all wasn't resolution, nor reconciliation, nor the restoration of what had been lost. It was the ability to live intentionally, to choose presence, and to embrace life in all its complexity. As she settled under the blankets, Emma felt a profound sense of peace. The storm of the past months had passed, leaving behind clarity, growth, and a heart open to connection. She knew challenges would come again, as they always would, but she also knew she was ready. And with that knowledge, she drifted into sleep, carrying with her the quiet certainty that life, messy, unpredictable, and beautiful, was hers to embrace, one choice at a time.